It took a 6-person jury in Liberty County, Florida, barely an hour and a half to acquit Sheriff Nick Finch of charges of official misconduct and falsifying records. Sheriff Finch, who had been removed from his elected position after the charges were filed, was immediately reinstated by Florida's Republican Governor Rick Scott. Sheriff Finch was arrested last June after he had ordered the release of Floyd Parrish, who had been arrested on a charge of carrying a concealed weapon without a permit after being stopped on suspicion of drunken driving. Finch, who upholds the Second Amendment and the innate right to keep and bear arms, ordered Sergeant Lisa Smith, who made the arrest, not to file charges against Parrish. Since the sheriff found the arrest to be invalid, he expunged any record of it from the files. He explains that he took those actions because of, quote, my beliefs and my stand on the Second Amendment. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement covertly investigated Sheriff Finch's actions. He was never contacted by them or interviewed by any of their investigators. Sheriff Finch's predicament provoked an outpouring of support and sympathy from across the nation. Among those who rallied to his side were the members of a group called the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, which was created by former Pima County, Arizona Sheriff Richard Mack. Richard Mack is a graduate of the FBI National Academy and served as the elected sheriff of Arizona's Pima County. In the mid-1990s, he filed a lawsuit against the Clinton administration regarding the Brady Bill, and he won a key victory in the Supreme Court for the right to keep and bear arms. Sheriff Mack is our guest today. Welcome to the program.
Well, thanks a lot. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you loud and clear coming in through Skype right there from Arizona. Sheriff.
Just a little correction first. I was the sheriff of Graham County, not Pima County.
All right, thanks for that correction, Sheriff. Now, critics of Sheriff Finch say that he overstepped his authority by dismissing a concealed weapons charge. He claims he had the authority to refuse to enforce the unconstitutional law. Which of those views is correct and why?
Well, when the law becomes abusive and contrary to the Constitution and in particular the right to keep and bear arms guaranteed within the Bill of Rights, you know, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The Bill of Rights went even above that. These are the principles that government can never modify or change or infringe. And so when Mr. Parrish was arrested on very flimsy probable cause, and he was not drunk driving, he was not drunk at all, so there was really no reason to go after him, but the deputy just kept going after him. And after Sheriff Finch became aware of it, he said, no, we're not going to do that. And the Constitution has to mean something and stand for something. And this is what you and I have talked about several times before. When you have to ask government for permit or permission to do that which is already guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, then you're going to have problems. And this is exactly the double-edged sword of asking government for a permit to carry a gun. Because then they can enforce that and regulate that, and you get some of these officious officers around the country, and they're going to start sending people to jail because you didn't get our permit, you didn't get our permission. Well, we're not subjects to that, and this is what I really appreciate and admire Sheriff Finch for, is that he nullified this arrest and said in court that the Constitution has to count for something.
Okay, Sheriff, why did Willie Meggs, the prosecutor, choose to pursue this case even though there was a constitutional standing?
You know, to me, it just baffles the mind. The only answer that you can legitimately come up with is that they were going after Sheriff Finch. They were going after a constitutional sheriff. They were shooting a shot over the bow, a warning to all other sheriffs. You don't do this. You do what we tell you. If you think you can come in and exercise authority to nullify this without going through us, then this is what's going to happen. So this is all of it. Willie Meggs, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General for the state of Florida, the Governor, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Justice Department there in Florida, all of these agencies went after Sheriff Finch and not after law and order and trying to get rid of local corruption. So the court ruled Finch not guilty, that he was operating in the boundaries of his authority
through the Constitution, yet the state
Most
pursued.
agreed with that he had the authority to do what he did.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Most everybody in court agreed that Sheriff Finch had the authority to do what he did.
Except the prosecutor.
Right.
Now, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is known to be lenient with officers who engage in misconduct. Just recently, for instance, it cleared Florida Trooper Dan Cole in an incident in which he used a taser on a handcuffed 19-year-old woman, which caused her to fracture her skull and then left her brain dead. Why would it be generally permissive for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to target Sheriff Finch for prosecution in this case, then?
Well, primarily because they were following orders. And as you alluded to in your opening monologue about this case, there was no evidence. There was no one involved in this investigation that actually sat down with the suspect in this case, which is highly irregular for investigators not to interview the suspect, especially one in this particular case. They never interviewed Finch. They never asked him what really happened, and so he never talked to him at all. So they went to court. And for these people to be that unprofessional, that they let police abuse go and police brutality go and always side with their buddies kind of within the law enforcement ranks. And, you know, they can shoot people and they can tase people and they can mistreat people. But when a sheriff nullifies the arrest of an innocent man, Floyd Parrish was innocent of doing anything wrong. He's never committed a crime. He is not a criminal. He's a law-abiding citizen. He's a good man. I met him and his brothers that got involved in this incident. They're all good people. And the real criminals were the investigators, the prosecutors, the Attorney General's office, and the governor of Florida.
Now let's talk about the jury, because it didn't take long to dismiss the charges against Sheriff Finch. What, in your view, do you believe the prosecution wasn't really determined to convict the sheriff? Were they just simply playing a theatrical game because they knew that they would get, that the case would be thrown out by the jury, or do you believe their case was just that weak?
It was a very weak case, but that's what really scared me, because they're going after him even though they had no evidence. And that really scared me, and I find that very alarming. They were hoping to get a jury that they could pull the wool over on and put up a smokescreen that they would buy. No, they wanted Sheriff Finch, and the theatrics, as you mentioned, and the histrionics going on in the courtroom proved that they wanted Sheriff Finch found guilty. They really went after him, and the judge sided with the prosecutors all the way through. The prosecutors could do one thing, and then the defense lawyer not allowed to do the same thing. And I could go into that, but it kind of gets into the minutia of courtroom protocol. But I'll guarantee you, the judge and the prosecutors guaranteed Sheriff Finch, had he been found guilty, that they would have been able to appeal very easily and get a mistrial. And I think that might have been what the prosecutors were after. They wanted Sheriff Finch to have to go through all the delays, the mistrials, and have to finance this whole thing himself. You got to remember, the governor suspended him without pay. The man hasn't received a salary for over 6 months.
Will he receive any back pay?
Oh yeah, he gets all his back pay. He hasn't got it yet. But what I'm really concerned about, and I hope every American will donate at our cspoa.org website, because we're still raising money for his legal defense. I don't think he's going to get lawyer fees, and he's spent nearly $100,000 on that.
Now, Sheriff, we've talked about the prosecutors, we've talked about the jury. Let's talk about the support on the ground in Liberty County. He was a duly elected sheriff of that county. How did the people respond to the victory?
Well, I'll tell you what, Sheriff Finch got a lot more support from like us, CSPOA and Oath Keepers and other groups in Florida. The people of Liberty County were a little bit timid about coming out. They were afraid of maybe the same things happening to him. They saw all this corruption going on, and it kind of scared them and pushed them back a little bit. But the jury obviously was not intimidated. And I'm grateful that they were touched by the truth, that they stood by their convictions. Like you said, it didn't even take an hour and a half for them to decide. And even if, and this was a big thing in court, even if Sheriff Finch had altered documents or even destroyed some documents or did whiteout on the jail log, which was a ridiculous thing that they kept bringing up in court. Who did the whiteout? It's like this big whiteout Liberty County caper, like somebody's going to make a movie out of the whiteout caper. You know, even if he had done those things, the law says they still have to prove that he did so with criminal intent. In fact, a quote is corrupt intent. So they had to prove that. The only thing that they proved in court is the reason he did it was his dedication to the Second Amendment.
Now, Sheriff, let me jump in because I want to ask you about, I'm going to go back to the jury question for just a minute, because was this a practice of jury nullification? Or
yes, absolutely. Of course it was. In fact, that's exactly what I've said. The arrest of Floyd Parrish was nullified by the sheriff, and then the arrest of the good sheriff was nullified by the jury and good people of the county.
So what was the exact charge, though? That
his charge was of falsifying public records, destruction of public records, and one of those was a felony.
All right, now, Sheriff, we have to take a quick break. I want to come back and talk to you about the Southern Poverty Law Center and what this acquittal means to them. So we got to take this break. Stay tuned for more. We're talking with Sheriff Mack of the Constitutional Sheriff and Peace Officers Association about the Sheriff Finch victory in Florida. We'll be right back.